Well, welcome everybody for this talk. We have two artists up on stage here, Wendy Kendrick and Max Adrian. We'll have a little conversation in a moment. I'm Sarah Behrens. I'm the Roy Lichtenstein Curatorial Fellow here at the Columbus Museum of Art, and one of the curators of the exhibition Quilting a Future, Contemporary Quilts and American Tradition. My co-curator, Deidre Hamler, I want to thank her for everything that she's done with both this exhibition and the neighboring exhibition, Accra, as well as our entire curatorial team who have worked very hard over the past few months and really year to get these two exhibitions up and running. So if you haven't had a chance to see the shows, they're just across the hallway. We encourage you all to go and see them, and they're up through January 28th. I also want to take a moment to thank the Wasserstrom family. This exhibition really came out of a strength of our collection, which is over 400 traditional American quilts that the Wasserstrom family has gifted us. So it's really looking at these traditional American quilts from the 19th and early 20th centuries and taking a look at contemporary art and artists who are engaging with textiles and quilting today. And that number is growing. It seems like over the past 5 to 10 years, these artists have really picked up textiles. So it's a very interesting time in the world of contemporary art. So I'm just going to introduce the two artists. I have some questions for them, and then I'm going to make them do all the hard work. And we have some images in the background as well for you to enjoy. So Wendy Kendrick. Wendy Kendrick's quilted portraits highlight the beauty and nobility intrinsic to Blackness. A 2010 visit to the East African country of Tanzania as a U.S. delegate for a women's artist exchange greatly impacted Wendy's life and art. Tanzania's Tinga Tinga art style and brazen mixing of patterns in women's clothing continues to influence her work today. Kendrick received her BA in Visual Studies from Dartmouth College and has furthered her studies through additional coursework taken at the Dayton Art Institute, CCAD across the street, and Quilt Surface Design Symposium. Her work has been featured at the King Arts Complex, the Burnell R. Roberts Triangle Gallery at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio, Star Arts Gallery, the Ohio Craft Museum, the Rhodes Office Tower, Joyce Gordon Gallery in Oakland, California, the Schott Tower Gallery, and Richard M. Ross Art Museum in Delaware, Ohio. Her work can be found in the permanent collections of the James Museum of Western Art in St. Petersburg, Florida, the Hood Museum of Art in Hanover, New Hampshire, and here at the Columbus Museum of Art. You can see that piece on the screen here. In 2021, Kendrick was an Amina Robinson Fellow living and working here in Columbus, Ohio in Amina's home. And we have Max Adrian. Max Adrian is a textile artist interested in ideas about queerness, desire, and consumerism. His soft sculptural practice finds inspiration in a variety of sewing-related crafts like quilting, bag making, inflatables, puppetry, drag, and fetish wear. Adrian employs an evocative aesthetic of bold colors and tactile materials that tease expectations of fun and pleasure. Adrian holds an MFA in Fiber and Material Studies from the Tyler School of Art and Architecture in Philadelphia. He received a BFA in Fiber and Creative Writing from the Kansas City Art Institute in 2015. Adrian was awarded a 2003 Individual Excellence Award from the Ohio Arts Council, as well as a 2022 Career Advancement Fellowship from the Center for Craft. His recent exhibition history includes shows at Skylab Gallery in Columbus, Ohio, Ditch Projects in Springfield, Oregon, the Charlotte Street Foundation in Kansas City, Missouri, and the Iridian Gallery in Richmond, Virginia. Adrian's practice has been supported by residencies and fellowships, including the Vermont Studio Center, Arrowmount School of Art and Crafts, Lighthouse Works, and Malay Arts, among others. So please give a round of applause to these two wonderful artists here. Okay, so I have a few questions for you both, and I wanted to start with quilting, since that is the theme of the exhibition. Can you speak to what quilting means to you? And I'm curious if you have any early memories of quilting. As I talk with people that have seen the show, or in anticipation of the show. It seems like everybody has some sort of memory of quilting, or they're a quilter themselves. It's often passed down, grandmothers and mothers and quilting circles. So just out of curiosity, what is your history and memory of quilting? Max, do you want to go first?
Early associations with quilting. I did not come from a very crafty family. So I'm one of those maybe rare people who doesn't have a lot of direct associations or memories of quilting from an early age, aside maybe from growing up in Missouri and driving through the countryside, seeing the barn square quilts like on barns, and thinking about like those shapes as indicating something about that place. So other than that, like kind of obscure association, it took me more into my adulthood to form my personal connections with quilts. I think a lot about what you were talking about with quilts as these objects of lineage and inheritance, connections to families and storytelling. And the more conversations I have with people around them, the more I do meet people, friends and other folks in the arts and crafts communities who have had quilts handed down to them and have such stories of the family members who made them, and what those quilts like say about their families. So I think a lot about quilts as signifiers of lineage and family and storytelling. And as a queer person, I'm interested in that association from a little bit of an alternative perspective, where in queer communities, this idea of chosen family is a very important concept in terms of reconstructing your family as you get older. So when I'm approaching quilting, I'm often thinking from a very metaphorical place of like, I haven't inherited a quilt from anybody, but what could a metaphorical queer quilt look like that I might have inherited from my queer ancestors, or something that I would leave behind for generations after me? So I look to pleather and athletic mesh and grommets and chains as my materials to work with for those quilts.
You're laughing, but that's very sweet as well. I love that. Wendy, do you have a comment on that question? It should be on.
Okay. For me, quilts are comfort. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Comfort in the sense that coming up, I did not have the pleasure of having anyone directly teach me about quilting, but they were there. They were on my grandmother's bed. They were on my aunt's bed in Kentucky when we would go for the summers, and they were warm. That's what I remember. And so I think of comfort, I think of snuggling up, but I was also fascinated when I would see these quilts, and I didn't think much of them. They were just what you had. The patterns, the fabrics, but they were worn and washed, because these quilts had been washed numerous times, over and over and over, and hung out to dry. But to look at that, see that little tiny stitching in it, but it was just that thought of, it was like having someone put their arms around you. And the only quilt that I have passed down came to me from my aunt, and it was in very poor shape, but I keep it in my studio, and I touch it every time I go in. Made a mistake of washing it. I know. But anyhow, it still survived. Yes, some of the cotton came out. But I'm leaving it the way it is. I don't want to, I've thought about repairing it. But it brings me comfort. It brings me comfort. It is about family. It is about tradition. It is about the continuance of a wonderful, wonderful skill, so to speak. And so, yes, that's what it means to me. It's truly comfort.
That's lovely. Just out of curiosity, if you are a quilter in the audience, can you raise your hand? I'm curious. Wow, look at this.
That's why they groaned.
There we go. Okay, so I wanted to talk just a little bit about each of your pieces that are in the show. Each piece is on the screen here. So if you can just spend a minute talking about what that piece means, the title, etc. Again, for those of you who haven't seen them, they are both on view now in two separate galleries. So Max, your piece is in the sort of patterns and techniques section. Wendy's, yours is in the narrative section. But a lot of these works could be interchangeable. They kind of have multiple themes going on. So Max, do you want to talk about your piece?
Sure. So my piece, Act 2, Scene 4, The Lone Snowman, is the fourth iteration in the series that I started a long time ago. In 2014, I think I started that series. And that was the first kind of direct engagement with thinking about quilting conceptually in my work, and thinking about my role, my relationship to sewing and quilting as a queer person, as a queer crafter. I was learning a lot about the AIDS memorial quilt at the time, and I was having a lot of conversations with queer elders about the 80s and the 90s and the AIDS epidemic, and I was thinking so much about how this great catastrophic event that I have no direct relationship to still sort of set the stage for the experiences and privileges that future generations of queer people experience. So that's where this kind of notion of Act 2 came from. It's the beginning of this second act without understanding completely the events of what preceded it. And very much thinking about the AIDS memorial quilt specifically as this like soft monument. So on one hand, there's this kind of grave seriousness, and I think about this piece as mirroring a body and its roughly body size scale, and its cycle of inflating and deflating, kind of breathing in and of itself. It's very full and upright, and it kind of sinks in and shrivels in on itself. So that transformation is important to the piece. And at the same time that there's this kind of serious tone to it, there's also this playfulness. It's three big balls stacked on top of each other that are faux fur, pleather, and satin, these like alluring materials that really draw you in. And that balance of play and seriousness is something that I try to explore in a lot of my projects.
Wendy, do you want to talk us through your piece?
Okay, so my piece is Queen Mother, and the construction of this piece took place between 21 and 22. So I actually started the piece when I was the Amina Robinson Fellow in 2021. And so when I was, I think, 2 weeks into my fellowship, my mother passed. And she was definitely a queen mother. And so I had this piece. The head that's where I begin always, is with the face or the head in my construction. And so I had that, and I was, I don't know. So after my fellowship, I took it back to the studio and continued to work on it. And so in this piece, I have a series. I've been doing queen mothers for a while. And they're always very vertical, because in my mind, they're very strong. In some respects, they're like totems. And so they always have, they're wearing what I call their collars, their neck collars, because they also are very spiritual, and they are women who pray. They pray a lot. And so the collars are, in some sense, their protection of their throat, because they're always whispering out prayers. And so with this piece, another thing that happened, I was had the fabrics in the body of the piece were given to me. I have people that give to me, and I don't take that lightly. When someone gifts me fabric, it means so much to me. And so we had traveled with friends to South Africa. And while on that trip, one of the ladies I met was from here. People were from all over the country. But one of the ladies said, I heard you were an artist and that you work with fabric. She said, I have some fabric for you when you get back home. So actually, those pieces that are in the body of that lower part came from a donation. And they're older fabrics. They're older African fabrics, which I did not realize after I used so many of them. But they were already cut in squares. So it was almost as if, even though she didn't know what I was working on, she was gifting me something that would continue my journey with the completion of this work. It also represents, for me, coming from a background of collage that I'll share a little as we continue to talk, but this was the first time I actually had pieced, which means for those of you that don't sew, and quilters, please don't send daggers up here because I'm coming from a different background, but I actually pieced it together for the first time because prior to that I was using a different technique. So the squares I took and some of them I had to cut down, but I pieced it together. But during the construction of it, just having the time, for me it's meditative as well. So even in the piecing and the background of it, but that's part of what I do. That's a continuation of a whole series that I have with Queen Mothers.
Fantastic. I think you both kind of talked about the verticality, or I see that definitely in both of your pieces, which is interesting because when we think of quilts, it's often the square. So it's really lovely to see this kind of vertical elongation in both of your works. Another question I had for you both, just thinking about contemporary artists, so many are working with textiles today, and specifically quilting, as is evidenced in the exhibition. How did you become interested in working with textiles or alternative materials? Do you have some sort of aha moment? Were you always sort of dabbling with sewing and textiles? Did you begin, your artistic process with sketching or other materials?
Okay, no, I actually started in collage. So I was working with paper, and I think there's maybe something up there. Uh-oh.
Bear with me, I have a lot of images, so we're just gonna click through a bit. Sneak preview at Max's.
Okay,
Here we go.
yes. Okay, so 2003. Thanks to my husband, he told me the last time I was speaking somewhere, he said, you have to do better with your dates. So I labeled them. It works when I can see it. It's a lot to cover. So when I first, and this for me in a way, my son called me, I just want to share something personal. My son called me earlier this evening to check and say, congratulations, Mom. He said, but how does it feel? He said, it's like you've come full circle because in 2000, I was here as a docent, having completed docent training, which back in those days, I don't know what it is now, was a full year of training. And so I was here at the museum as a docent for 7, 8 years before I left, active docent. So he was like, Mom, I said, I don't know, it's just kind of surreal. So back during that time, I don't know if any of the Thursday docents are here, by any chance, and I saw a hand back there. Yes. So on our team, there happened to be several docents that were artists. So they were really big encouragers to me. And at one point, they asked me to come in and actually, do a little workshop. And I was like, they're humoring me. But at that point, I was also a stay-at-home mom. When I came to the museum, our youngest child was just entering first grade. And so, I'm doing all the stuff my moms do with kids and raising them. But I came across this fantastic material, which happened to be boxes that were being sent to the recycle bin, every week. And so I don't know what struck me, but I saw it as an awesome resource for art. And so I started what I call box art. So this here is actually designed on recycled boxes. So I would take cereal boxes, cracker boxes, whatever was being consumed in my house. I had friends, I was asking them, please have your kids, what kind of cereal do you have? You know, save the boxes for me. Ritz crackers, Cheez-Its were fantastic. I like that red and orange. It was the combo. But the reason I included, because I wanted folks to understand my process, how I came to the fabric, but I actually started by surface design on this cardboard. So I saw the colors, and I thought the colors were amazing. I knew there was something psychological, someone in some office, some team, you know, had a marketing, you know, something behind it. But it got me, but I saw the colors. So I actually started designing on top of the boxes. And so that's what you're seeing here, if that answers.
That is truly fabulous.
So yeah, so collage was where I started, and I thought that by sharing this, it would also connect, as you see, as we continue to go in terms of the fabrics. But this is where I started.
Thank you. Max?
I was always a very crafty kid, and just loved to get my hands on anything. I would make puppet shows in my bedroom as a kid. Getting into high school, one week I'd be making a 7-foot sculpture out of PVC pipe and chiffon, and the next week I'm painting portraits of characters from SNL. Like, I've always been very drawn to just art making. However, the thing that took me to art school was this real love and desire to be an animator. Totally wanted to be a next Tim Burton style person. But I only lasted 5 weeks in the animation program before I realized this is just not a good fit for me. And there's one day sitting at my old school light table, just agonizing over animating just my hand moving. I'm just staring at my hand doing this for hours, and I look out the window and I see the fiber kids marching to the center of the green quad of our campus, erecting this giant woven banner and dancing around it, and I thought, those people are having fun. I'm not having fun. I want to go have fun with the fiber people. And I really didn't have much, there was nothing else other than that took me in there. I could have gone into sculpture, I could have gone into ceramics, I don't know, but there was something about the joy, I guess, that I really perceived in the fiber department. It also didn't hurt that there were a couple of really cute boys in there. And at the start of that week, I was animating, and by Friday, I was threading a loom. And it was this total paradigm shift. I knew so certainly that I was going to be an animator, and then so quickly, things just totally changed. However, I really took with me into my fiber work a lot of the same interests that I had in animation, in narrative, in personification of objects, in having a playful sense of humor, and a sense of transformation, mutability. So these interests that initially really drove me to pursue this one path in the arts totally pivoted to this other direction that really spoke to my need to get my hands active in an art making process. And then sewing just really quickly stuck with me as a form of constructing. I really like to build things, and I like things that are light. I'm not really so much a fan of wood or metal, things that are heavy. I like being able to make something large that can be folded and packed away, and the sense of expansion really spoke to me. So yeah, that's how I came to working with textiles.
That's lovely. In the last talk, I think they were talking a bit about that transformation, aha moment that artists go through. So it sounds like maybe you had something like that with your, move over into fibers. Another question I had for you both, or a comment, I suppose, to begin. Quilting as an art form has developed in fascinating ways over time, as we know. American quilting has gone from a functional and sort of decorative history. You can think of bed covers, clothing for keeping warm, adding visual interest, and you'll see that in the exhibition as well, to incorporating conceptual thoughts and ideas and narratives. So, what do you think about this change and this idea of craft versus high art? I was talking with a few people. You know, the exhibition really highlights gender. Quilting has traditionally been seen as women's work and an applied or decorative art, and then, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, not as esteemed as things like painting and sculpture. So, you know, how does quilting and textile art fit in, you know, the broader spectrum of art for you?
Okay, we're gonna roll those slides.
Yeah. That will help you. to
Well,
answer the question.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it forward because it was sitting here. Okay, everybody, I lost my thought for a minute. So on this, bringing it forward, even when I was creating with the box art, personally, I felt it was art. It was art that would be acceptable anywhere. Those were my thoughts. I'm not a keen person in terms of labeling so much. You know, there's something about that that just like, just kind of like fingernails on a chalkboard. It just kind of gets to me. So even with these pieces here, Eve on the left side, this is still me creating, it's collage. And so it's still me creating on top of these boxes, which I thought was a fabulous find. I didn't know why anyone else had thought like, okay, get these boxes. To the right, still, I'm doing collage. This is easing me to, I'm moving in that direction, but I still felt like there was nothing within me that said, you know, this was not art. It didn't belong, you know, wherever. It could go any place. I never saw a division like that. And I think as an artist, as you create, I don't know, at least in my mind, that is not at the forefront. Like, where does my art go after I create it? First and foremost, I'm creating it from an inner space within me, and it's something that I have to do. It's something like, you know, a mathematician who loves figures and numbers or whatever, or a scientist who loves to, you know, research, or you know, any kind of person, any kind of field, it's one of those things that you do. So in terms of these categories, I don't know. I think if you look at the work, one prime example would be G's Ben quilters. That people looked, you know, here are these phenomenal artists that are down, you know, in a small town that have been creating for generations phenomenal work. And some would say, you know, quilts are craft, perhaps. But then someone comes along and says, you know, a light bulb goes off and sees something in it and says, wow, this is art worthy of, you know, being in a gallery, being in a museum. So, you know, it's really, I think it's very subjective when you start doing that. I think that also sometimes in that subjective viewing of art that you create this hierarchy. And so you end up having some artists that are elevated and some that are, you know, kind of placed over in another category as if they're not as significant. And I don't think that that's really the way that it should move. You know, I'm not the one that runs all that kind of stuff, but I'm just saying that's personally how I feel.
Who runs
it? And so even this, you can keep rolling, scoot on through these. You can roll through these. So for me, I'm backing up a little bit. Okay, hang with me, okay? This is my mind, how it rolls. Sorry. So getting back to the first question, the other question, the fabric piece, for me, the pivotal was travel. So going to Tanzania and seeing those fabrics that's what drew me in. That was a pivotal point for me that took me from paper over to fabric. So I'm just saying that in terms of whatever you create, I feel that, and while I was there, it changed my perspective because I saw people that were creating, one, lifespan was different from ours. It was much shorter. And so artists there would create on a roadside. They would create under a corrugated tin roof, top supported by beams and nothing else, no walls. Some may have had a studio, but it wasn't that, let's get caught up in what your surroundings are and where you work. When I first started working, I was on the kitchen table. My kids would have to be fed, and I was like, look, you eat on this side of the table because mom is creating on this side. And that's just how it was. You do what you have to do. So in terms of, all of that, that's just not for me.
I mean, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a false dichotomy, and I think there's been a lot that's been prescribed to art and a lot that's prescribed to craft. I think that distinction matters significantly less to the actual creatives and makers out of anybody who are the most concerned with what they're making and how they're feeling about it and what they're thinking about. I think this idea that art is like mysterious and sexy and it's about form and that craft is like more grounded and it's nice and it's about like material and process. It's like all of those discourses are happening regardless of what the art making is, whether it's a basket or a painting or a marble sculpture, whatever. I think the reality is that that distinction has been used to elevate some people, typically white, straight, male sculptors and painters, and craft tends to not on the whole, but generally it's labor, it's working class people, it's poor people, it's people of color, it's queer people, it's women and non-male identifying people, and so those communities are deemed craft, and that's a way of separating from this this higher art form. And for me, I'm so interested in breaking all of that down, and I want to see sexy craft.
I love that. I already knew your answers to those questions. I just wanted to hear you explain it. Okay, so we'll move on. You are both local Ohio-based artists. Does the history of quilting in Ohio or the Midwest more generally play into your use of the medium? Does that have any bearing on how you got started or not at all?
I can't say that it does.
No, not necessarily. But I think not directly. Indirectly, though, I would say it was no. I'll still say no. But I will say what was there, what I have found, and how I have been inspired. It's come more so from the artist community, particularly the Black artists, female artists community. And I say that because when I first came here to Columbus, we came in '92, so my journey is too long to tell you the whole story. But those were the people that really encouraged me. There were, as I mentioned before, there were artists on my docent team that truly encouraged me. They encouraged me to go back to CCAD because back then we could audit these classes. Well, not audit, we would pay practically nothing. And so I ended up going back and doing foundation. But that community of women artists, for one, it was the first time I had actually been in a community of artists. You know, I didn't see artists that looked like me in real life that wasn't dead or in a book until I was 17. And I met Bing Davis in Dayton, Ohio. And so after that, coming here, and it was like, wow, these people, they're artists. You know, Columbus has a really, really interesting art community. And it's like, no one really thinks that we do, but it's like a hidden secret. We do have a very thriving art community here, but these women particularly were very encouraging at all levels. And so, no, in answer to your question, the quilts, no. Down the road, yes, with Dr. Maslumi, Carolyn Maslumi, with her being a resident of Ohio and not living far down the road, yes, I would connect with her later down the road, but immediately Midwest, no. Took y'all on a long journey for that one, didn't I?
Yeah, I've heard that over and over and over again. I've only been in Ohio a couple years now, but just the ease in which you can kind of find a community here to practice your art, and I think that's really lovely. So, all right, well, we'll move on to the next question. I just have a couple of more. I'm always curious about where artists gather inspiration for their work. So it could be other artists, certain genres, music, public figures, current events, etc. Can you explain a little bit about where your inspiration comes from in general or in regards to a specific work of art?
I definitely have some art world influences. Kara Walker, Nick Cave, Aaron McIntosh, Wells Chandler, like these are some phenomenal artists. However, like I would say the vast majority of my influences do not come from the art world. It's actually way more performance related that like drives my inspiration. Puppetry, drag performances, stage theater, like any activation or like a union of like performer and prop and costume and space. Like in Europe, they consider this like scenography and this idea of an entire space kind of working to set a tone or tell a story, and that kind of stuff like really inspires me. So yeah, anytime I can go see a performance, go see a drag show like that, get some ideas going, as well as architecture. Really anything that kind of like puts my body in a different sort of perspective. Like a performance, I'm imagining what's happening on a stage or in front of me and imagining that in relation to my body, or a building, the way that you move through a building makes me think about my body in different ways too, and that's something that I'm interested in my work, whether it's a large architectural inflatable or a 3-foot square quilt. Like I'm always interested in objects that elicit these unexpected relationships to our bodies.
These are beautiful.
Thank you.
Forgot we were here.
Do you want to take on that question, Wendy? Where do you get your inspiration from?
Inspiration for me comes from living. It comes from, for one, you know, having been here at the museum all those years. When I first came here, I described it as being like a kid in a candy store, because at that point I really wasn't creating art. I had a situation in college that really turned me off from, you know, art. I wasn't gonna do it at all. So when I got here, it was really my way of easing back into it. So I felt like if I could see it, that would be really good, you know? And it was tremendous. So galleries, museums, life. And oftentimes I find myself going back to childhood memories, you know, things that happened in my childhood. Memories of my grandmother teaching me how to sew, sitting at her feet when she would sew for other people. And travel is always one. I love to travel. And even going, when I mentioned South Africa, going to Tanzania, this did something for me. Travel is really, this particular time, this was 2010. So at that point, that took me over to fabric. So the ones that come after this, if you can. So after that trip to Tanzania, this quilt, I had never done a quilt. Prior to, I was creating quilts in my mind. And seriously, I saw them in my mind, but I was too afraid to really venture there. You know, I kind of stayed in my little area working with paper. And so I came in one day and I had this new sewing machine. I had done a collage piece and sewed it, and at that point I was like, whoa, yes, I'm gonna treat myself. And so I bought this new machine and I hadn't used it. It sat for 2 years. I had not turned it on or anything. And something said, just get it out and use it. So when I was in Tanzania, it was all the fabrics. You know, when I go back through all my photos, I was taking a lot of pictures of, you know, a lot of those were taken, some of them sometimes when we were in transit. I'd be shooting from the, you know, through the window or out the window, trying to end, but they were a lot of the people, particularly the women, and all those fabrics that I would see and the mixing of them that just, I don't know, it spoke to me because it was very different from what I was accustomed to here in the States. And it was a freedom. You know, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I like it. So when I came back a couple years later, the piece on the left is the very first quilt that I created. And I did call it Freedom because it opened a door for me, that travel. And I did not know how to quilt for the quilters out there. I didn't know what quilting was. I was a collage artist. So I did not know how to make it stick together. A quilt has 3 layers. So I tied it, I hand tied it. And it has a lovely purple, string that I use, purple. I love colors. So yes, and even the travel, when I came back, the piece on the left is probably one of the last pieces of collage, but it's mixed media because I've put that fabric. The fabric is coming in on that. So yes, travel is big, but life, just living, and particularly now with all the things going on in our country, I'm a person who feels deeply. So being a mother, being a part of the community, a lot of times the things that happen even locally, I find really, I feel sorrow very deeply. And so I try to work those out through this. So it's living, that's why I said living. Living is the inspiration oftentimes.
Are those spools of thread at the top of this work
They
here?
are.
Yeah.
That's actually my great-grandmother. So my great-grandmother was a tailor of men's clothing, men's suits. And she also happened to be a Garveyite, which for those that don't know, Marcus Garvey was, I won't go into all the history, but anyhow, he was big in the Back to Africa movement. And so my mother told me that my great-grandmother was a Garveyite. And I often wished I had been able to ask her the questions like, what was it? What was on her mind? What was she thinking? But the fact that she sewed, I wanted to pay tribute to her. So I included those old wooden spools up at the top. And, you know, even though her face is actually fabric. So I'm still doing collage, but I was taking like a black broadcloth and painting and collaging. The eyes are collaged on, but there's fabric, so I'm making that transition.
Fantastic. Okay, and I just had one last question for you both, and I think we might have just a minute or two for questions after this. But I was curious if you have anything interesting coming up that you're looking forward to. It can be professional, any kind of new work that you are engaging with, any residencies or exhibitions, or anything personally that you're looking forward to. Max, I know you just had a show open, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a big moment right now. My last slide shows an installation image. Just last week, I traveled to Houston, Texas to install a very large-scale solo exhibition titled Ripstop, and this is at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And this will be up until January 6th, so if anybody finds themselves in the Houston area, maybe around the holidays or anything, please go check out this exhibition. And the organization itself is a lovely, like, phenomenal contemporary craft organization in Houston. So mounting this exhibition was an incredible experience. I also just started a residency at the Cultural Arts Center here in town. I've been moving into the studio space this week and getting settled. So I would love to say hi to you there. If anyone is taking workshops or checking out exhibitions in there, I believe Open Studios will be starting next week. They'll be every Wednesday, noon to 3. And I'll be around the Cultural Arts Center a lot until about late January. So hoping to get some brand new work cooking, because literally all of my work is in Texas right now.
Not all of it. We have a piece here. How about you, Wendy? Mm-hmm.
I sent a lot of slides in. You're gonna have to
Clicker
look
goes
at
a little
them, okay?
slowly. Tell
You're
me
gonna have to
when
look
to
at
stop.
them. Okay, kind of rolling through. Yeah, those were, okay. Can I just, I'm gonna continue my journey. So for me, working with paper for so many years and then not coming to fabric until 2012, I feel like I have a lot to do. There's still a lot of stories I have to tell, a lot to get out. And the fact that I did not actually begin my professional career until well after my kids were almost out of school, totally. I was like, my journey, everyone comes to their art practice different ways. We don't all come the same way. And so for me, I had the opportunity to be introduced to Dr. Carolyn Maslumi, who is in the show, in the current show here that just opened. And so once I met her, I was invited, this was 2016. And so storytelling. I wasn't storytelling in my work, not necessarily, not like she was expecting, I think. And so this piece here, Teen Tobacco Workers, came as a result of me being introduced to Dr. Maslumi in 2016 by Miss Betty Stoll. She grabbed my hand. It was at a reception for the Mandela Show up in Wilberforce. And she grabbed me and just said, "You need to meet her. I want to introduce you." And so, my knees are knocking and all that stuff. But anyhow, this was a piece that I created, and you can just kind of roll through. So what I plan on doing is continuing to tell the stories. On the right, this is where I kind of started with quilting. I was just doing heads, so to speak. I remember taking it out up in Chicago at a festival, and I was just, I don't know, I was just doing this stuff. I don't know where it's going. It comes from inside. And someone, not this piece, but I had one, and someone came up and said, "Well, what is this, a placemat?" And I was like, but I couldn't answer them because I really didn't know what it was. I'm still working through. So really and truly, when I look and as I put these photos together, I feel honestly like from 2003 up until maybe the last few years, those have been experiments. My work have been experiments. Now it's time for me to take all of that I've learned and I've had time to process through all these years and really tell the stories that I have to tell. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing. So you're gonna roll on through and get to the end. This one was another one that was with the Women of Color Quilters Network, which Dr. Maslumi was one of the founders of that. And so you can see this is a departure from what I typically do. But here I'm really learning how to tell a story in a different way. Before, the stories were more in my head. I knew what the story was. I was putting something out, but I knew the story, but not necessarily I don't know if everyone got the story. Maybe they did, sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. But this particular, it was forcing me. So this one was with Charles Young, and we each had something to take an aspect and tell a story. So yes, I have stories if you want to keep going and get all the way through. So I continue to learn as I work. These are more recent, and that's why I said I have more stories to tell. I've got a new body of work I'm working on, I'm really excited about. So on the, let me see, the left was when I first went into the Amina Robinson Fellowship. And when I was there, I had a deadline to make for Dr. Meslumi. So this on the left was for, this was the one that was down at the museum in St. Petersburg, the Western Museum, Western Museum. And this was an exhibition on Black pioneers, very extensive, long timeline. But I had the task of creating something about Sarah Breedlove, otherwise known as Madam C.J. Walker. So that's my piece there, empowerment in a 10, because she was all about empowering women economically and so much more. So that was that. The one in the middle after that, I was busy last year with a lot going on. It was a commission for Dartmouth College. The Black alumni of Dartmouth College commissioned me to create this piece for a celebration, the 50th anniversary of the Black alum there. And so I created this, and it's a story, actually it focuses on 3 of my classmates who wrote a paper while we were juniors in college on institutional racism at Dartmouth College. They delivered it to the president. There were others, many that worked on the paper, and there were some of the guys on campus who worked with them. But when it came time to sign off on that, everyone stepped back. But these 3 young women. And so it struck me as I thought about it, we were kids. We were just kids. But these were some young kids that saw wrongs. We all saw it. But they had the nerve to say, we will step forward and sign off on it. And some of them, pushback was very rough, to be honest. So in the background of that is actually the reprint that was distributed on campus of that paper. And that is the front page of it that I have printed to fabric and put in the background. And around them, what looks like fringe, there were 38 of us that graduated, Black women that graduated from Dartmouth between the years of 72 and 76. And so the remaining 35 are surrounding them. And then to the right, that piece was started during my fellowship, my Amina Fellowship, and sisters, so that means a lot to me.
Fantastic. That middle piece, wow, so detailed. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the talk. We do have a minute, I think. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand, shout it out. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm really curious, Henrik, I see your pieces, they're absolutely stunning. Unfortunately, my daughter had to go to a class, but we were looking at your mother piece. And I'm kind of curious, I see a lot of African mask influences in Mayan, I see Mayan and Inca, and I'm kind of curious where those influences came in to be part of your art. Is it something part of heritage? Is it something that, again, during your travels that really influenced you? Because, I mean, they're beautiful, and it's just really interesting to see these different masks and how that plays into your work.
Okay, good question. The masks have been with me, I want to say almost forever. They started in college. They did not look like these at all, believe me. I have what I did in college. I still have that. And I would not show that to anyone. It was rough. But that whole idea of it started there, but it wasn't until actually I went to my son's, he was in middle school, Went there, you know, and have parents come in and do different things, activities, and I had volunteered to come in and do this workshop. And so what I had were these ovals, paper ovals. I had the kids creating these faces. And while I was doing it, it struck me, it's like, wow, I can use this. And I started doing these masks, like I said, in paper. They were small. And they won't let me go, so to speak. And so they have evolved over time. They just keep going and going and going. So in the course of creating them, yes, I was researching a lot. I looked at masks from all over the globe, but the ones that I really settled in on came from the continent of Africa. And it wasn't any specific location that I would look at. It was really the shapes that got my interest. And I love the simplicity of some of the masks that I would see. And so I started saving them on my, Pinterest board? Yeah, I have tons of them on there. And so I really I was looking for shapes because in my work, shapes are very important, colors are very important. The patterns, as my husband would say, I don't know how, you make all this stuff work, but it works. And so actually the fabrics, the masking, has meant different things to me personally, depending on what year I was working on something. And I think as being a black woman or a black person in the U.S., masking is something that we do oftentimes not realizing we're masking. Because, on any given day, people can say things, do things, or whatever, and it's like you have to learn. It's something that you learn, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that you do it. So at some stages, of my creative process and years, it meant that. Other times, it was definitely just something that was the more decorative, I'll say. But then it became something that meant the complexities as a result of the things that we would have to face as a people, the complexities of us as a people. We are complex based upon the complexities of this country. And so all the things that we have to face, all of that, what's inside of me, I'll be honest, it comes out. And so I'm working through. I've always told my friends, I've always said to my family that art has always been my therapy. And so those things that I struggle with, that I see, that I don't know, why we this, I go to art and work it out. So yes, if that answers your question.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much again. We really appreciate you coming out, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, both of you.